Welcome to the Remote Testing Training Module. This module will walk you through the information and administration features of remote testing. This module will provide information on the following topics: an overview of remote administration and the testing window, student eligibility for remote testing participation, and the parent and guardian consent requirements. It will also provide a quick overview of remote test administration guidance, the OSAS portal infrastructure, and accessing the Remote Test Administration certification course. And finally, we will provide a checklist of responsibilities and contact information for technical support. Let's start with an overview of remote administration and the remote testing window. First, remote testing has been provided and available for districts and schools as required under ESSA Ed Division 22 to administer the Oregon Statewide Summative Assessment. This information provides data to help families, schools, districts, and the state understand student academic achievement and provides signals to monitor the systems at the local level and throughout Oregon to evaluate how the Oregon education system is functioning. Therefore, ODE has implemented a remote administration option for unique circumstances. The remote testing window will open on different dates based on the specific content areas and grade levels. Appendix A of the Test Administration Manual provides a detailed list of the dates. Please note that all of Oregon's alternate tests and surveys must be conducted in person and are not available as remote options. In this next section, we will discuss which students are eligible to participate in remote testing. Most students across Oregon will test in person. Students whose primary instruction model was in person will participate in the Oregon Summative Assessments in person as aligned to their school's instructional model. Students who participate in a remote or online instructional model may be offered the opportunity to participate in summative assessments remotely. In certain circumstances, the district or schools might have students participate in an in-person testing environment, even if they received their instruction remotely or online. We will explain those scenarios in the next slide. Some districts and schools might need to make arrangements for an alternate in-person testing opportunity for students participating in remote or online instructional model. If a school has technology limitations for the TA or the students, such as limited broadband, hardware requirements, or assistive technology, or if a school identifies accessibility needs cannot be supported, such as designated or accommodation supports, and if a student is participating in either the Oregon Extended Assessment or the alternate ELPA, or any Oregon statewide assessment presented in a Braille version, they will not be able to provide remote testing and will need to work with the student and family to schedule the test at an alternate location, such as a district office or an alternate school site. The following section describes the parent-guardian consent requirements for remote testing. The Oregon Department of Education has provided a consent form districts should use to get written verification of consent. Please check with your district on communication and the district's process for gaining parent-guardian permission. Even if a student is receiving their instruction remotely or online, consent is required for a student to participate in a remotely proctored test session. The Parent-Guardian Remote Test Administration Agreement form has two checkboxes to indicate the preference for their child participating in the Oregon Summative Assessments. Either my child will or my child will not participate in remote testing. If a parent has checked they will not provide consent to participate remotely, A district should determine the unique circumstances of remote or online instruction and explore how in-person testing can be provided as a viable option. Additionally, the form indicates whether the student will utilize their webcam and thus have video and audio enabled, audio only, or no video or audio enabled. Student participation in remote testing does not require that a student video or audio is enabled during the test session. However, it is important to note and communicate to families that the only form of two-way communication without the video and audio or audio only enabled is an embedded chat feature within the remote testing platform, and therefore technical support might be limited. Permissions must be set in TIDE to allow a student to participate in remote administration. TIDE also indicates if video permission has been obtained from the parent or guardian. If a parent/guardian provides consent, the permissions must be set in TIDE to yes in the remote tester setting at the student level. In some cases, if there are large numbers of students participating in remote testing, a DTC, STC, or TA might want to utilize a batch upload to the TIDE system. Please refer to the TIDE user guide for more information on batch uploads. Please note that all students in TIDE will have the remote tester buttons. It is not necessary to change this setting for all students. If no bubble has been selected in TIDE, the system will automatically default to no. Again, the radio button must be selected yes for the remote testing functionality to work for summative assessments and/or the SEED survey, and even the Oregon interim assessments. If the parent has granted permission for their child to have video or audio enabled during remote testing, the DTC, STC, or TA will need to indicate the preferences within TIDE. Similar to the remote testing settings, if no dropdown has been selected in TIDE, the system will automatically default to no. However, DTCs, STCs, or TAs should verify this TIDE setting is accurate and set prior to remote administration based on the information obtained in the parent-guardian remote testing administration and agreement form. In the following section, we will provide some general guidance on remote test administration and distinguish differences for remote testing using the OSAS Secure Browser. The OSAS online testing system has been upgraded to allow proctors to administer tests to students who are remote and not at school. No additional software is needed for test administrators to enable the remote testing capabilities for a remote session. However, TAs will need to complete and pass the remote testing certification course. Once a TA has completed this requirement, the remote proctoring setting will be automatically activated in the TA's TIDE settings. Again, it is important to complete the remote testing certification course prior to trying to start a remote testing session. Proctors log into the same test administration site they would use if students were testing at school. From this site, proctors can select a remote testing session or an in-person session. Proctors can also schedule sessions in advance and provide a link for students to join the session when it starts. This functionality is covered in the remote testing certification course. Remote students should use the OSAS Secure Browser to access the same testing website they would access if in school, and the test takes place the same way it would if everyone were together in the same classroom. If the secure browser is not already installed on a student's device, and if it's not possible to install the secure browser on a student's device, districts and schools should work with families to arrange for in-person testing. The secure browser is required to remotely participate in the ELPA, OSAS ELA, math, and science assessments. The SEED survey can be administered through the secure browser or a remote student link, which we will cover in a few moments. As previously stated, to administer tests to students who are remote, TAs must complete and pass the Remote Test Administration Certification course. This course is only required for those TAs that will be administering the remote testing session. The course will walk you through how to administer remote assessments to students and can be accessed via the OSAS portal under the Test Administrators tab. The Remote Test Administration Certification course explains many topics, such as preparing your computer before testing, accessing the remote proctoring test administration site, scheduling a remote test session, conveying information to remote students, and communicating during a live session, how to join and begin a remote session that was scheduled in advance, communicate with and assist remote students during a test session, and how to pause or stop a remote test session. Based on the assessment or survey within the Oregon statewide assessment system, there are two pathways for remote administration. The first is the OSAS Secure Browser. This is the same secure browser students use to access the Oregon Summative Assessment for in-person administration. The OSAS Secure Browser can be downloaded to electronic devices by visiting the OSAS portal and downloading the secure browser based on the electronic device's operating system. The second pathway is using a remote student testing web link. Within the Test Administrator Session Manager, TAs can create a specific remote student testing web link, which is covered during the Remote Testing Certification course. We will discuss which assessments or surveys will use which pathway for remote testing in the next few slides. All Oregon statewide summative assessments are required to be administered using the OSAS Secure Browser. This includes the ELPA, the OSAS ELA, math, and science tests. If a district is unable to load a secure browser on the student's device, they will need to arrange an alternate in-person opportunity. The SEED survey and the Oregon interim assessments can be administered remotely using the OSAS Secure Browser, but it is not required. The SEED survey and interim assessments are the only two components that can be administered using a remote student testing web link. Please note that a TA must be actively monitoring students and available to support students when a remote link is being used. A student should start and finish their test using the same method. Once a student begins a remote test, they should complete that test in its entirety in the remote format. If a student changes their location and tests at an in-person site after starting a remote session, a TA can still activate and assign a remote session ID. It is also important to note that unlike the in-person ELPA, the remote version of the ELPA is broken out by domain, in which each of these testing instances appear as a separate test, with the student needing to log back into the system for each domain. For example, if a student starts the ELPA reading domain, they will complete all components of the ELPA reading domain and press End Test. They will then need to once again log back into the remote testing platform and select the next ELPA domain, writing, and be approved by the TA to begin this domain of the ELPA. The same will be true for starting the listening domain and the speaking domain. The following section provides some high-level responsibilities to be completed before testing, during testing, and after testing has occurred. The following table provides some actions that occur before testing. In addition to completing this training module, any educator that is planning to proctor a remote testing session must complete the remote testing certification course to have their TA Tide account activated for remote testing. It is also important to share test information with families and students, such as testing dates, SSID numbers, and the session ID number for remote testing sessions. The remote testing platform provides two-way communication once students have logged into their test. However, this two-way communication is not active until a student has fully completed the login process. Therefore, any communication required prior to testing, such as test directions, should be communicated using the Local Learning Management System, or LMS, such as Zoom, Google Classroom, or other systems. Reviewing the student directions is important prior to testing to ensure students and families are familiar with the assessment and they have logged into the correct assessment and session. Though a student cannot have another application running while they are in the secure browser, the TA can have an active session and the LMS running in the background in case a student or family is having login difficulties and needs technical support. Again, the student will have to close out of all applications before launching the secure browser. During the test, remote TAs will primarily spend their time monitoring student progress through the test session platform. The TA should actively monitor for any student who has activated the hand raised feature. This feature will be covered during the remote testing certification course, but it signals that a student needs additional support. After testing, the remote TAs will communicate the status of a student's testing progress with families and communicate any additional feedback about the remote testing experience to either the school testing coordinator or district testing coordinator to inform future enhancements to the remote testing system. This is a valuable feedback process to help ODE ensure that the remote testing features are actively and properly functioning. In this last section, we'll provide a quick checklist for remote testing and contact information for technical support. The following list provides a quick checklist to complete before a remote testing session. 1. Ensure that the parent has completed and returned the ODE Parent Guardian Remote Test Administration Agreement Form. 2. Both parental consent for remote testing and video attributes have been properly set in Tide. 3. Ensure all student test settings and tools have been set in Tide prior to the student beginning their test. 4. The TA has taken and passed the remote TA certification course. Again, you will not be able to administer a remote session without completing this course. 5. Diagnostic checks have been completed and verified by both the TA and the students, ensuring that their machines are actively and properly functioning. And finally, test session dates and times set with students and parents has been communicated so that all parties are aware of the expectations for the test administration date. Please refer to the following for contact information and technical support. If you need additional information or have questions, please contact your district testing coordinator or consult the resources posted on the ODE Assessment Administration website under the Remote Testing Resources section. For content-specific support or questions, please refer to the ODE Assessment Help webpage. If you need technical assistance for remote testing, you can contact the OSAS Help Desk by email or phone. This concludes Module 10, Remote Testing.